Your mother needs a key to our house, Lauren. What if there's an emergency? My husband Marcus said, already reaching for the spare set in our kitchen drawer, and my stomach twisted as I watched him hand over what I knew would become my personal hell pass. I'm Lauren, 32, a pediatric nurse who'd been working double shifts to help us save for a bigger house, and we'd been married for 4 years. But I'd known from day one that Margaret, my mother-in-law, had what you'd call boundary issues, which made my weak suggestion of "can't she just call if there's an emergency?" fall on deaf ears immediately. Marcus gave me that look, the one that said I was being unreasonable about his perfectly reasonable mother, saying, "Come on, babe, she raised me alone after Dad left. She's just looking out for us." And that Tuesday in March 2023, I was too exhausted from a 16-hour shift to argue further, because the twins I'd been monitoring in the NICU had finally stabilized, and all I wanted was to collapse into our bed and sleep until my next shift. I didn't have the energy to explain, again, why a 58-year-old woman who lived 40 minutes away and had never once encountered an actual emergency at our house didn't need unrestricted access to our home. So when Margaret hugged me a little too tightly, her perfectly manicured nails digging slightly into my back, promising, "Oh, Lauren, you won't even know I have it. I promise I'll only use it for real emergencies," I forced a smile, remembering the time she'd defined emergency as needing to borrow my stand mixer at 6 a.m. on a Sunday because hers had broken, or when she'd called Marcus at 2 a.m. panicking because she'd seen a news report about break-ins in a neighborhood 3 towns over from us. Our 3-bedroom ranch house in the suburbs had been our sanctuary, the first place that felt truly mine after years of cramped apartments, where I'd spent months making it exactly how we wanted, from the carefully organized kitchen where everything had its place, to my home office where I kept my continuing education materials arranged just so. But now Marcus was kissing my forehead saying, "Thanks for understanding. Mom just worries about us. She means well." Looking back now after everything that happened, I should have trusted that twisting feeling in my gut, should have hidden those keys or accidentally lost them. But I was tired, overwhelmed, and desperately trying to keep peace in my marriage, having no idea that within 6 months those keys would unlock the beginning of the end of life as I knew it. The pattern started long before the keys, but I'd been too in love, or maybe too exhausted, to see it clearly. Because Margaret had this way of making her invasions seem like favors, her control disguised as concern.
"I reorganized your pantry last week while you were at work," she announced during Sunday dinner at her house, just 2 months after our wedding, making it sound like she'd done us this incredible service. Everything was so chaotic, Lauren. I labeled all the containers and arranged them by expiration date. And I'd stood in my kitchen that night, staring at the military precision of my once familiar pantry, feeling like a stranger in my own home, because my system, which made perfect sense to me, had been erased, replaced with Margaret's vision of order. That was thoughtful, I'd managed, while Marcus beamed at his mother's initiative, and the pantry was just the beginning of what would become 4 years of systematic erasure.
Over those years, Margaret had rearranged my bathroom cabinets because all those medications should be alphabetized, reorganized my closet so you'll find your scrubs so much easier now, and even rearranged our bedroom furniture while we were on our anniversary trip because the feng shui was all wrong, each time with Marcus kissing my temple and whispering some variation of, "She means well," or, "That's just how she shows love."
But it wasn't love. It was dominance, wrapped in a grandmother's smile and delivered with passive-aggressive precision, like when I told Marcus one evening, exhausted after a particularly brutal shift where we'd lost a premature baby. "Your mother rearranged my office again. I can't find any of my continuing education materials." And he didn't even look up from his laptop, just said, "She mentioned she was tidying up, said it looked like a tornado hit it." "It's my office, Marcus, my space," I said, my voice cracking with frustration and grief from the day, but his response was always the same. "Come on, Lauren. She drove 40 minutes just to help clean. Can't you just appreciate the gesture?" That was always his response. I should be grateful that his mother invaded my spaces, erased my systems, and made me feel like a guest in the home I was killing myself to pay for, because Margaret had raised Marcus alone after his father left when he was 10, and she'd been mother, father, best friend, and confidant, which I understood. Truly I did. But understanding didn't make it easier when she called him 15 times a day, or when she dropped by unannounced at least 3 times a week, or when she made subtle comments about how I loaded the dishwasher wrong, or how her pot roast was Marcus's favorite, not like that dried chicken you made last week. The worst part was how she'd mastered the art of plausible deniability, because every invasion, every criticism, every boundary crossed came wrapped in concern and sweetness. How could I complain about a mother-in-law who just wanted to help, who loved us so much she couldn't stay away, who was only thinking of our best interests? Even my own mother, during one of our rare phone calls, had said, "At least she cares, honey. Some mother-in-laws don't even visit." But they didn't understand what it was like to work 16-hour shifts, saving other people's babies, only to come home and find your mother-in-law had thrown away your favorite coffee mug because it was chipped and dangerous. So I started changing at work, showering at the hospital, anything to delay coming home because I never knew what I'd find rearranged, reorganized, or improved, and our house had stopped feeling like home. It had become Margaret's satellite location, a place where she could exercise her need for control while I paid the mortgage.
It was a Thursday in September 2023, when everything finally shattered beyond repair, after I'd just finished a grueling 20-hour shift where we'd had 3 emergency C-sections, and I'd held a mother's hand as she said goodbye to her stillborn daughter, my scrub still carrying the weight of that grief as I drove home at 3 a.m., desperately needing the sanctuary of my own space. The first sign something was wrong hit me before I even opened the door. The porch light was on, which I never left on, and then I noticed Margaret's car parked in our driveway, making my exhausted brain struggle to process why she'd be here at 3 in the morning, until I remembered Marcus was away on a business trip to Chicago. My key turned in the lock, but the door stopped after 2 inches, caught on the chain lock that we never used, and I heard movement inside before Margaret's face appeared in the gap. "Oh, Lauren, you scared me. I wasn't expecting you home so early," she said, as if I was the intruder in my own home at 3 in the morning. "Margaret, what are you doing here?" I asked, exhaustion making my voice sharper than usual, and she unlatched the chain with theatrical slowness, explaining, "Well, with Marcus gone, I thought I'd stay over and keep an eye on things. You know how unsafe it is for a woman alone," completely ignoring that I came home alone at all hours regularly. When I finally stepped inside, the full scope of her latest help hit me like a physical blow. The living room furniture had been completely rearranged. My grandmother's rocking chair moved to the corner, the couch facing the wrong direction, the coffee table replaced with what looked like an antique from her house, and that was just what I could see in the dim light. "I've been so busy making improvements," she chirped, following me as I walked through my violated space in stunned silence. "Wait until you see what I did with the kitchen. Oh, and I packed up all those dusty medical journals in your office. They were such an eyesore, and I threw out all those expired medications in your bathroom. Some were from 2021, Lauren, that's dangerous." The medications she'd thrown out were my emergency supplies from the hospital, perfectly good and part of my disaster preparedness kit. But when I tried to explain, she waved me off. "Oh, and I called a locksmith today. These locks are so old. I had them upgraded to those new electronic ones. So much safer. Here's your new code." And she handed me a sticky note with numbers I didn't recognize for locks I didn't authorize on the house I paid for. "Margaret," I said, my voice deadly quiet as I fought to control the rage building in my chest, "you changed our locks?" "Well, the locksmith said the old ones were practically pickable by anyone," she said, missing my tone entirely. "And I got a great deal, only $500, which I put on Marcus's credit card. He won't mind. It's for your safety after all." And that's when I noticed my spare keys, the ones I kept in the kitchen drawer, sitting on the counter in plain view. "Did you make copies of the new keys?" I asked, already knowing the answer, and she smiled that smile that made me want to scream. "Of course, dear, I made myself 2 sets just in case. You can't be too careful these days." Standing there in my rearranged home with new locks I didn't choose and codes I didn't set, surrounded by Margaret's improvements and violations, something inside me finally snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet certainty of a decision that had been building for 4 years. I was done being the grateful daughter-in-law, done pretending this was normal, done letting Marcus dismiss my boundaries as overreactions. Margaret was still talking. Something about plans to repaint the bedroom next week, but I wasn't listening anymore, because I was already planning something of my own, something that would end this invasion once and for all. And as I smiled and nodded at whatever she was saying, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The same calm I felt at work when handling a crisis, when every move had to be precise, calculated, and effective. "That sounds lovely, Margaret," I heard myself say with a sweetness that surprised us both. "Would you like some tea before you head home?" And she beamed at what she thought was acceptance. "Oh, I'm not going home tonight, dear. I'm staying in the guest room. I already moved some of my things in." And that's when I saw the 3 suitcases in the hallway, the ones that made it clear this wasn't a one-night stay. "Of course you are," I said, maintaining that strange, serene smile. "How thoughtful of you." And as I made her tea with hands that didn't shake despite the fury coursing through my veins, I knew that Margaret had just made her biggest mistake. She'd shown me exactly how far she was willing to go, and now it was my turn to show her what happened when you pushed an exhausted, overworked nurse past her breaking point. The war for my home had officially begun, and Margaret had no idea she'd already lost. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, telling my supervisor I had a stomach bug, when really I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to reclaim my life without losing my marriage, though at that point, I wasn't sure there was much left to save. Margaret had gone home around 6 a.m., leaving behind her 3 suitcases, just in case, and a note detailing all the improvements she planned to make next week, including hiring painters to redo our bedroom in what she called soothing pastels. And I sat at my kitchen table, staring at that note, feeling like a stranger in my own home. That's when I remembered the nanny cam we'd bought last year for our nephew's baby shower, but never gave because they'd received 2 others. And I dug through our closet until I found it, still in its box, a tiny camera disguised as a clock that could connect to my phone and record everything. Within an hour, I had it set up in the living room, positioned perfectly to capture the front door and most of the main area. And then I ordered 3 more cameras online with overnight shipping, one for the kitchen, one for my office, and one for our bedroom. Because if Margaret was going to invade my space, I was going to document every single violation. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was sneaking around my own home. But as I set up a cloud storage account under a new email address that Marcus didn't know about, I felt that calm determination settling deeper into my bones. The same feeling I got when preparing for a difficult procedure at work, where every step had to be precise. When Marcus called from Chicago that afternoon, I played my part perfectly. "Your mom was so sweet to stay over, honey. She even rearranged some furniture to make the feng shui better." And I could hear the relief in his voice when he said, "See? I told you she just wants to help. Thanks for being understanding, babe." "Of course," I replied, staring at the $500 locksmith charge on our credit card statement. Family is family. And after we hung up, I started documenting everything, photographing the rearranged rooms, the receipt for the locks, the sticky note with the new codes, creating a digital folder titled Home Projects that looked innocent enough. I went back to work the next day, maintaining my normal routine while the cameras silently recorded, and when I checked the footage that evening, I couldn't believe what I saw. Margaret had let herself in at 10 a.m., gone through our mail, spent an hour in our bedroom doing God knows what, and made several phone calls from our landline, all while I was at work saving lives. The videos were crystal clear as she rifled through my desk drawers, held up my lingerie with disgust before shoving it to the back of the drawer, and even went through our financial documents, taking photos with her phone of our bank statements. And I realized with growing fury that this had probably been happening for months, maybe years. But I kept my mask firmly in place, greeting her warmly when she showed up for Sunday dinner, complimenting her pot roast while she made passive-aggressive comments about my unusual spice organization system that she'd fixed, and Marcus beamed at how well we were getting along, completely oblivious to the war being waged under his nose. Over the next 2 weeks, I collected more evidence than I ever imagined I'd need. Footage of her going through our medicine cabinet and photographing my prescriptions, trying on my jewelry and putting several pieces in her purse, even lying on our bed and going through my nightstand, where she found and read my old journal from college. She made copies of important documents, called contractors about renovations we couldn't afford and didn't want. And once I caught her on camera telling someone on the phone, "Lauren's not very domestic. Poor Marcus basically takes care of himself. But don't worry, I'm handling things." And I had to leave the room to stop myself from screaming. The breaking point came when I watched her unlock my home office, pack up all my continuing education certificates and nursing awards into a box labeled garage sale, muttering, "All this career nonsense. She should be focusing on giving me grandchildren." And that's when I knew this wasn't just about control. It was about erasing me entirely, replacing me with her vision of what Marcus's wife should be. That's when I started making my own moves. Subtle at first, but calculated. Beginning with a call to the locksmith company where I explained there had been a misunderstanding about the authorization for the work, and the helpful customer service rep was very interested to learn that someone who wasn't the homeowner had ordered the service using someone else's credit card. "We take fraud very seriously, ma'am," she said, and I could hear her typing furiously. "We'll need to document this for our records, and you might want to file a police report," which I assured her I was considering, knowing that paper trail would be useful later. Next came the meeting with our family lawyer, scheduled discreetly during my lunch break, where I showed him select footage of Margaret taking my jewelry, and his eyebrows nearly hit his hairline. "Lauren, this is criminal trespass and theft. You need to protect yourself legally." And he helped me draft a cease and desist letter that I kept in my locked desk drawer at work, waiting for the right moment. The real masterstroke came when I discovered Margaret had been telling everyone at her book club that she was practically living with Marcus and Lauren now, helping them get their lives together. So I started my own subtle campaign, mentioning casually to mutual friends how concerned I was about Margaret's memory issues, how she'd been confused about boundaries lately, even suggesting maybe she needed to see a doctor. "Just last week she forgot she doesn't live with us and brought 3 suitcases over," I told Carol from the gym, whose husband golfed with Marcus, adding with practiced worry, "We're thinking of getting her evaluated. These personality changes can be serious at her age." And I knew that gossip would spread faster than wildfire. When Marcus came back from Chicago, I was extra attentive, cooking his favorite meals, being the perfect wife, all while the cameras rolled and captured Margaret's increasingly bold invasions, including one afternoon when she brought a real estate agent to tour our house, just to get an idea of its value for when we upgrade. I started leaving strategically placed notes around the house in my handwriting. "Remember, Mom doesn't live here," on the bathroom mirror. "Check with Lauren before home improvements" on the fridge, creating a paper trail that would look like gentle reminders, but were really evidence of an ongoing problem. The tension almost broke when Margaret arrived one morning to find me still home, having taken a personal day I hadn't mentioned, and the look of shock on her face when she walked in with her key was priceless. "Oh, Lauren, I thought you'd be at work," she stammered, clutching fabric samples she'd brought to reupholster our couch. "Just taking a mental health day," I said sweetly, watching her squirm. "Those fabric samples are lovely, Margaret, but Marcus and I already picked out what we want." Which was a complete lie, but the way her face flushed told me she knew she'd been caught, even if she didn't know how much I really knew. That evening she called Marcus in tears, claiming I'd been hostile and unwelcoming, and I listened from the bedroom as he tried to calm her down, assuring her I was probably just stressed from work. And when he came to bed, I pretended to be asleep, planning my final move while he tossed and turned beside me. The stage was set perfectly. I had weeks of footage, documented theft, legal backing, and a growing narrative in the community about Margaret's concerning behavior, and all I needed now was the perfect moment to let it all come crashing down. The perfect moment came on a Thursday evening in November, when Margaret announced she'd invited her book club to host their next meeting at her son's lovely home, without asking either of us, and Marcus just shrugged it off with his usual, "What's the harm, Lauren?" completely missing my carefully practiced look of concern. "Actually, honey, I think this is the perfect opportunity," I said, squeezing his hand. "Your mom's been under so much stress lately with all these memory issues. Maybe having her friends here will help her feel more grounded." And I watched the confusion flicker across his face before I added, "I'll make sure everything goes perfectly." The night of the book club, I prepared meticulously, setting up our smart TV to connect to my phone, placing printed screenshots of bank statements in manila folders, and making sure our home looked immaculate, except for strategic touches like my nursing awards prominently displayed, and our financial documents visible on the desk, knowing Margaret wouldn't be able to resist fixing things in front of her audience. 12 women arrived at 7 p.m., including Carol from the gym, who gave me a knowing look of sympathy about poor Margaret's condition, and Margaret held court in my living room, already rearranging the coffee table placement while saying, "I basically live here part-time now. Someone has to help these young people manage their lives." I served coffee and cookies with a gracious smile, waiting until they were deep into discussing their book, ironically a thriller about family secrets, when Margaret stood up and announced, "Let me give you all a tour of what I've done with the place," leading them through my home like she owned it, pointing out all her improvements while I followed quietly behind. When we reached my office, she actually said, "This was such a cluttered mess before, all those silly nursing certificates everywhere. As if anyone cares about her little job when she should be focusing on giving me grandchildren." And that's when I knew it was time. "Oh, Margaret," I said softly, letting concern drip from every word. "You're having one of your confused moments again. This isn't your house, remember? We've talked about this with Dr. Patterson." And the women exchanged uncomfortable glances as Margaret's face went red. "Don't be ridiculous, Lauren. I have a key. I come here whenever I want. I've been fixing this disaster of a house for months," she snapped. And I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers that weren't from nervousness but from barely contained satisfaction. "I know you've been confused lately, so I started recording things to show your doctor," I said, casting the first video to our TV screen, where suddenly Margaret appeared in crystal clear footage, rifling through our mail at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the gasps from her book club were audible. The room went silent except for the sound from the TV as video after video played. Margaret trying on my jewelry and putting pieces in her purse, going through our financial documents and photographing them, calling contractors about renovations, lying on our bed and reading my personal journal, and the pièce de résistance, her packing up my nursing awards while muttering about my career nonsense. I was just... Margaret stammered, but I wasn't done. Pulling out the manila folder with the credit card statement showing the unauthorized $500 charge, the letter from the locksmith company about the fraudulent service, and the cease and desist letter from our lawyer. "We've been so worried about you," I continued, my voice breaking with perfectly practiced emotion. "The stealing, the trespassing, the identity theft with the credit card. Dr. Patterson says this kind of behavior can indicate serious cognitive decline, and we're prepared to seek conservatorship if necessary to protect you from criminal charges." Marcus had come home early at my text and stood in the doorway, his face white as he watched his mother's sins laid bare in front of her entire social circle. And when he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Mom, is this... Have you been... Oh my God, you stole from us?" The book club scattered like startled birds, murmuring excuses and gathering their things, while Carol patted my shoulder and whispered, "You poor dear. Dealing with this decline must be so hard." And within minutes, Margaret stood alone in our living room, her empire of control crumbling as her reputation dissolved. "How dare you?" she hissed. But the fight had gone out of her when she realized Marcus was looking at her like a stranger, and I stood there in my own home, finally feeling like it belonged to me again. "The locks will be changed tomorrow," I said calmly. "And if you come here again without an invitation, we'll file a restraining order and criminal charges. The evidence is backed up in multiple locations, so don't even think about trying anything." Marcus finally found his voice. "Get out, Mom, just get out." And the woman who'd invaded our lives for 4 years shuffled to the door, leaving behind her 3 suitcases and her dreams of control. 6 months later, I wake up in my own bed, in my own home, and the silence feels like freedom rather than absence, because it's the silence of peace, not the held breath of waiting for the next invasion. Marcus and I went to counseling. He needed it more than me, honestly, having to process that his mother wasn't the saint he'd built her up to be. And slowly we rebuilt our marriage on new foundations, ones where my boundaries mattered as much as his comfort, where no was a complete sentence and where family didn't mean accepting abuse. Margaret tried everything at first. Tears, manipulation, flying monkeys in the form of relatives calling to shame us for abandoning a poor widow. But the beauty of video evidence is that it speaks louder than guilt trips. And one by one, even her staunchest defenders fell silent when they saw the footage. She eventually moved to Florida to live near her sister, posting passive-aggressive memes about ungrateful children on Facebook. But we don't follow her anymore. And the last I heard from Carol at the gym, the book club had disbanded because nobody felt comfortable after that evening at your house, which still makes me smile. Our home feels like ours now. My grandmother's rocking chair sits exactly where I want it. My nursing awards hang proudly in my office, and the kitchen is organized in my beautifully chaotic system that makes perfect sense to me, even if nobody else understands why the paprika lives next to the coffee filters. Marcus learned to see his mother clearly for the first time in his life, and while that was painful, it was necessary, because now when he says I love you, I know he's choosing me, not just defaulting to the path of least resistance with his mother. Last week, I found one of Margaret's fabric samples wedged behind the couch cushion, and instead of anger, I felt only amusement as I tossed it in the trash, because that's all she is now, a remnant of a difficult time that we survived and overcame. My colleagues at work have noticed the change in me, how I don't drag myself through shifts anymore, how I laugh more easily, how I've stopped changing in the hospital bathroom, and when they ask what's different, I just say I finally learned to protect my peace. Sometimes the biggest act of love isn't acceptance, it's resistance, it's standing firm, it's saying no more to those who would erase you, even if they share your last name or gave birth to the person you married.